Countries have had difficult periods in their history, such as colonialism, attacks on sovereignty for prolonged periods of time. Now that the colonial era is over, they have to realize that they cannot use this tone in speaking with their partners. Everyone has equal rights in this multipolar world. Yes, there are economic giants like India or China. Our country is among the top four economies in purchasing power parity. But that doesn't mean anyone should dominate politics or global security. Everyone must be equal.
Europe just got a reality check from Vladimir Putin. And if they do not take heed, it is going to be absolutely disastrous for the West. In this video, we're going to talk about why it will be disastrous and what is Africa's position based off this current situation. Thank you so much for clicking on this video today. If you don't know me, my name is TJ. I'm Nigerian and British mixed. And on this channel, we talk about African geopolitics. There's an old Caribbean saying that parents would give to their kids, which is, if you do not hear, then you must feel. Meaning there will be consequences if you do not heed the warning. Well, that is the position that Europe and the United States find themselves in right now. And I put together some notes so that I cover this topic thoroughly. Vladimir Putin's statement that the colonial era is over captures a reality the West refuses to accept. Across the global South, nations are increasingly rejecting Western hegemony, seeking out partnerships with BRICS and SCO and other non-Western blocs. Across the global South, the Tianjin SCO summit was symbolic. Countries are no longer willing to tolerate Western bullying, sanctions, and predatory trade deals. This is not just geopolitics. It is the end of an era where Europe and America dictated the terms unchallenged. Despite declining influence, the United States and Europe continue operating with a colonial mindset. A clear example of this is Ukraine. The leaked phone call between a US official, Victoria Nuland, and Jeffrey Pyatt happened before Viktor Yanukovych was removed, where they openly discussed who they, meaning the US, wanted to install after his ouster. Essentially, the United States, although they have not admitted it, did a covert operation to remove Yanukovych, and it was discussed on a phone call. This was a textbook colonial act. Foreign powers hand-picking the leadership of a sovereign nation. Add to this the broken promises about NATO eastward expansion after the Cold War. The West repeatedly assured Russia that NATO would not move its borders, yet those agreements have been ignored. These provocations are the true catalyst of Russia's actions in Ukraine. Yet the West frames the war as a mindless, unprovoked invasion. This misrepresentation is more than dishonesty. It reflects a deep inability to confront reality, a trait that has defined Western dealings with the global South for decades. Africans understand this dynamic because we have lived through it for centuries. Colonial powers signed treaties they had no intentions of honoring. Land was stolen, resources were stripped, and people enslaved. After so-called independence, neocolonial structures were put in place. The CFA franc currency zones, structural adjustment programs, military bases that ensured dependency. Today, the same arrogance persists. Western governments lecture Africa on democracy while supporting coups or assassinations when leaders refuse to submit. Examples: Patrice Lumumba in Congo was removed with Western complicity when he resisted foreign exploitation of Congolese minerals. Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso was assassinated after rejecting IMF World Bank dependency and calling for African unity. In Libya, NATO destroyed the state under Gaddafi, who had been pushing for a gold-backed African currency to break free from the dollar and euro. The country is now a failed state and a hub of human trafficking. France continued to profit from West Africa through the CFA franc, a colonial currency system forcing African nations to store reserves in Paris. These are not ancient events. These are ongoing acts of colonial behavior dressed up as partnership. Unlike Europe, Africa is not blind to the changing winds. Partnerships with China, Russia, India, and Brazil are opening alternatives to colonial exploitation. BRICS expansion offers trade without IMF strings and currency manipulation. China's Belt and Road investment in Africa infrastructure, while not perfect, represent tangible roads and energy projects, things Western aid has failed to deliver. Russia has supplied fertilizer, wheat, and energy to African nations during the Ukraine war, despite Western sanctions. These partnerships may have their flaws, but they at least recognize Africa as partners, not a colony. Europe today is escalating towards a hot war with Russia, despite lacking the resources or unity to sustain such a conflict. And the reason I say this is because although I'm in Uganda, I still have my UK phone number. I got a text message a few days ago talking about emergency alerts from the government that they are going to route to my phone in the case of an emergency. I've had this phone number for 25 years. I've never received such a text from the government. And Germany is currently doing some military acts right now in potential preparation for conflict with Russia. Not to mention, the EU just made a deal to get weapons from the United States. None of this is good. If the European Union think they can actually take on a hot war with Russia, it's going to be a disaster. Europe is economically fragile. Energy costs are high, industries are uncompetitive, and debt is growing. Aggressive rhetoric from Brussels and London ignores reality. Europe cannot afford this war. And by the way, that is even aside from the potential loss of life. Financially, they can't afford it, and we don't want to see people die. Internal tensions are boiling over. Migrant crises have fueled sovereignty marches and calls for stricter border controls. Cost of living protests are widespread as inflation erodes household stability. Recession signals are appearing across the EU with weakened consumer spending and declining industry. Instead of solving these problems, leaders push populations towards war, a war they do not support and cannot win. Europe's blindness offers Africa a warning. When leaders ignore their people's needs and pursue arrogance abroad, collapse follows. Africa must avoid copying dependency, aggression, and delusions. Instead, sovereignty requires food security, ending the 43 billion annual food import bill, despite Africa holding 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land. Currency independence, breaking free from colonial systems like the CFA franc. Value-add trade, exporting processed goods instead of raw minerals. Regional unity, building pan-African infrastructure like the Trans-African Rail projects rather than relying on Europe and American lenders. Europe resembles a fighter who steps into the ring, overconfident, convinced of strength it does not have, facing a seasoned opponent. Africa has seen this before. Colonial powers overextended themselves, convinced of eternal dominance, only to collapse. The arrogance that destroyed them is now visible in Europe's approach to Russia. Sun Tzu warned, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Europe knows neither itself nor Russia. It's misjudged its economic fragility, its divided population, and its lack of global support. It also misjudges Russia's resilience, unity, and capability to enjoy sanctions and war pressure. This is a recipe for disaster. Africa must not tie its future to collapsing powers. The West offers lectures, sanctions, and exploitation. The Global South offers imperfect but real opportunities for partnership and mutual growth. The colonial era is over, but the West has not yet realized it. Africa must ensure it never returns. And the tragic thing is that Africa could have been such a good partner for Europe. All they needed was equal and fair exchange. It would allow Africa to grow. And it would mean that a situation where migrants want to go to Europe wouldn't even happen in the first place, because Africa would be a place of opportunity. Yet, they've kept their heel on the neck of Africa, whilst pretending in the media they're for justice and righteousness, and they want the world to progress and proceed. If they do not start matching their actions with their rhetoric, it's just a complete disaster. The lesson Africa must learn is unity, honesty, and integrity. We have to stop squabbling amongst ourselves. Otherwise, the fate that I'm predicting to happen to Europe, conflicts, wars, and instability will remain and continue in the continent of Africa. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. But if you have nothing to say, would it be too much for me to ask you to write the words reality check in the comment section? It just lets me know that you watched the video to the end, you support the channel, you like what I'm doing, and you want me to continue. Thank you so much for watching today, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.